The casting of Frank Stone is a third-person horror adventure game set in the world of Dead by Daylight, where you play as a series of characters and they all get caught up in the stigma of Frank Stone. The game is available on Steam, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series consoles. Atmosphere. The casting of Frank Stone is not quite half filled with spooky forays into the old steel mill and the areas around it, as well as the home of Augustine Lieber. These have lots of foreboding scenery that fits the movie-like quality of the game, but they're often filled with character chatter that ends up disarming the situation.
Yeah. Oh. I thought you just liked hanging out around haunted mills.
You don't really think it's haunted.
Don't I?
Knock it off.
Its success at really capitalizing on these well-crafted environments is something the game struggles with. There's a decided lack of tension when there's multiple people walking around an area together, making jokes and talking about events, and it doesn't really present much in the way of danger for a large portion of the game. It's content to allow you to explore for as long as you want without feeling threatened or as though anything is going to happen. It did have some moments near the end where the urgency of the situation added pressure, though even these moments are in the minority, as the game spends far more time in dialogue and cutscenes than in gameplay, and this really feels like it's taking the wheel out of your hands and the tension along with it. You can argue that maybe the dialogue choices have the potential to lead to negative outcomes, adds a bit of tension, but it's only as tense as you are invested in the story.
Hey, right on time!
Time to get cooking!
The rest of the game is filled with endearing character chatter, and the characters themselves are likable, enough to make it a fun watch, but calling it horror is a bit of a push. The game's pacing is again very movie-like and has a slow build-up of the horror elements, with the majority of the atmospheric parts of the game being in this slim section at the start, and then again at the very end, with the middle consisting of storytelling and raising of the stakes. The atmosphere is there sometimes, and sometimes it's almost good, but most of the time it's waiting for something to happen, like the rest of us. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. Unfortunately, the casting of Frank Stone is very light on scary moments for a lot of the game, with traditional quick-time events that were made popular by supermassive games being largely absent, along with the jump scares and chase sections being almost totally replaced by using a camera to hold back Frank Stone, which didn't have the same impact at all. Frank Stone in appearance is great in all of the scenes he appears in, but it's not usually put to good use except from at the start. The few QTEs that were in the game could have damning consequences, which was as close to shock as the game really got, but this did make failing them feel unfair. The game took around 5 hours to beat, and it's difficult to remember any really frightening moments from that time at all. It doesn't feel like enough time or thought was put into the horror elements, and this has impacted the absolute hardest in the scares section. That's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. The game's movie-like quality continues with its soundtrack. During the spooky moments, electrifying synths sneak into your ears, backed up by the orchestral score. Something that makes the fight scenes and the more dramatic moments feel more impactful is the choir chattering into a dissonant wail. The soundtrack is pretty creative within the limits of its instrumentation. Rolling drums, plucking strings, and other things that give different parts of the game a unique feel, like screeching synths that feel like crumbling rocks breaking apart, and a metallic ice shelf slides into an ocean of molten viscera. But despite being very unique, it does struggle to be memorable. The sound effects are, as usual, immaculate and realistic to the point of feeling like the game was filmed as opposed to developed. The voice acting for the characters is pretty on point. Sheriff Sam, Chris and Augustine all sound great with their respected deliveries. The dialogue can sometimes be awkward, but is hardly a surprise with the characters you meet and talk to. There's directional audio and reverb on everything. The sound design is pretty much perfect. That's one Perry Mason.
Oh, what the fuck?
Oh, shit!
Damn. Is that a...
Yeah. And it's got friends.
This is insane.
Gore. Though rare, the game's gore is really fun to see. The death scenes are fast, brutal, and often result in people being sliced to pieces in entertaining ways. The game doesn't use too much gore outside of the death scenes, and some of the death scenes come out of nowhere, which could be considered a pro for shock value, but again, unexpected deaths can feel undeserved. That's 2 Harry Masons. Story. The story is split between the 2 time periods, the 1980s where a group of friends is shooting a horror film called Murder Mill, and 2024 where 3 strangers arrive at a mysterious mansion, invited by a mysterious host to talk about that same film. The 2 time periods vary wildly in terms of interest, with the teens working on the film being far more interesting to watch thanks to their interactions and the events staying relatively in the realms of the game's opening, one of the highlights of the game, which sets the stage for Frank Stone, the game's antagonist. The 2024 time period, with the strangers trying to figure out what's really going on, has minor intrigue, but it feels like it's stretching too little too far and really doesn't end up explaining a great deal of how or why most of it is really happening, with characters' motives being unclear all the way up to the credits. There are certain things like the time travel elements of the story that really don't seem to exist for a reason, and it's unclear again what benefit doing any of this had to the antagonists. The story is tied to a larger world of Dead by Daylight, but having not played but seen some of that game, it feels like fans of the franchise won't really find much in the casting of Frank Stone to latch onto, besides Frank Stone himself and the game's ending, which is more a reference, but ends up defeating a great deal of the point to the game in terms of the choices made along the way. The story itself would have been better had it decided to just stick with one specific timeline instead of 2, and the dialogue, notes, and other elements of the story can genuinely be really great, but other parts of the game can be confusing or boring, making the final score 2 out of 5 Harry Masons. Despite the game's score, I ended up really enjoying the casting of Frank Stone. Something about the 1980s characters wanting to make a movie was endearing, and the dialogue made it fun to take part in. Though its horror content, which the review is based on, was very sparse and didn't always work. As I said, I imagine fans of Dead by Daylight aren't really going to find much enjoyment in this, and the game's references to Dead by Daylight are about all there is to relate to. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I wish I could watch Murder Mill, I didn't get involved in the filming process, and I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Let's go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.